All right, I want to welcome Sean Bugler. He's a cloud architect, speaker, technology evangelist, YouTuber. You should catch us. We'll make sure to get out on the link when we put out this video and in the chat before this session is done. Some links to Sean and some of the things he's involved in. He works for Metropolitan Transportation Commission in San Francisco. So he is in aware of the government challenges that we have today. And so, Sean, thank you for coming and sharing that with us.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Jeremy. It's always good to see you, and I'm really excited to finally come speak at the unicorn of a user group that is all of my pain. No, I'm genuinely excited to be here, and I appreciate you having me. All right. Everybody with me?
Looks good.
All right. Well, gang, we're going to go ahead and get into it here because there is just too much good stuff to talk about. I enjoyed the conversation leading up to kicking this off, and I really thank everybody who took the time to join us here. And of course, for all of you who are watching this and recording, rest assured you missed a ton of great jokes right before we started recording. So this is innovating without authority. This is an evolution of a class that I used to teach when I first got into technology consulting, which was influencing without authority. It was this idea that there are elements of our jobs that require buy-in, and whether we have the authority to coerce somebody to do something or not, that it is almost always in our best interest to try and think through how we push these things forward in a way that's tactful, that's compelling, that's exciting. And that's really where the genesis of this concept comes in. It's this idea of taking these really exciting tools that are becoming available, that are not difficult, but the capabilities that these tools bring to the table are, in a lot of different spaces, so blank canvas. They're so open-ended that they're overwhelming, and it can be difficult to simply say to an end user, hey, you're getting access to a low-code app development platform, and expect them to get anything from that other than, well, I'm not a coder, and then leave. So that's really kind of what this is all about. Now, what I'd say is, as we're going through this, if there are things that jump out to you, if there are things that I say that you relate to, that you have thoughts on, if you disagree with, jump in. Don't hesitate to unmute yourself and add in what it is that what your experience brings to this conversation. I will, as Jeremy will tell you, continue to talk in perpetuity. So let's go ahead and get into it, dear. Some ground rules just to start. I don't speak for my organization. Of course, we'll talk a little bit about what it is that we do as an organization, the things that I've pushed forward within our organization, but it's important to note that all of my opinions are my own. All of my bad jokes are my own. I don't speak for MTC. I can't show you anything live in production for two reasons. One, we run the risk of revealing sensitive data. That's just always kind of the stuff that I work on tends to revolve around potentially sensitive data. That said, I have in select instances created copies of those spaces so that we'll be able to see some stuff here as we go. And then the second reason is because we are actually moving away from GCC. We are one of the rare government organizations that are not beholden to the same data residency laws that the feds and, to a large extent, state governments are beholden to. So actually ditching GCC because it sucks. That said, I continue to be an advocate for the community.
That was the end of Sean's presentation for today.
Because at the end of the day, I continue to be an advocate for a better GCC, a better GCC high, a better DoD experience, because the transparency conversation is still one that needs to be addressed to a greater degree by Microsoft. But all that said, there's a lot of packed boxes, so to speak, in our tenants as well. So that's also why we'll avoid showing you just messy bedroom in production. And the last ground rule here is I will accidentally swear at some point, and I am genuinely sorry. I try not to do it in my talks. I do it anyways. Yeah, we'll leave that there. Hi, I'm Sean Bugler. I'm a cloud architect with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. We're a government agency based in the San Francisco Bay Area. We're an MPO, a metropolitan planning organization. What that means is that we manage the housing and transportation planning for the region of San Francisco. We're the third largest MPO, behind, I think, New York and LA. This is being recorded. I should know this. Damn it. Damn it. There you go. See, I did it already. So we're responsible for the planning, the financing, and the coordinating of the 9 counties of the San Francisco Bay Area, preparing for the next generation of trips, distributing funds to a wide array of partners, and getting all owners to mesh as best as possible. Our chief information officer, he has this great saying, which is that we like to ensure that, out of this big loaf of money that funnels through our organization, we want to make sure that everybody gets fed, nobody gets fat. The San Francisco Bay Area is comprised of 7.5 million customers, 7.5 million constituents, 9 counties, 101 municipalities, and over 24 transit operators. Across all of those, our job is to try and tie them together in a way that makes sense for the region, to steer them away from making decisions that, each one of these areas has an elected official whose whole job, rightfully so, is to try and focus on investing in and bolstering their specific spot. So our job is to try and create a regional plan that works for everybody, because a super region that works together more effectively is better for everybody in the grand scheme of things. We also support consumer-facing products like the Clipper Regional Transit Card, which is the transit card that can be used across all the transit operators in the San Francisco Bay Area, the bridge tolling system Fast Track, and we also run the 511 dialing system. We also only do that with about 300 employees, which is a staggering amount of reach when you consider the employee to constituent ratio. And the reason I highlight this isn't to brag. It's to emphasize that efficiency is in our DNA, because it has to be. Our mission has grown dramatically over the last decade, over the last 2 decades, over the last 3 decades. And with that has come an absolute need to think about things in innovative ways to try and ensure that, one, we can manage these influxes of changes as the region changes so dramatically, but also to ensure that we're still trying to think about the best possible experience for the person that lives in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so that's really kind of why the Power Platform has always been so important to us as an organization, both internally and in collaboration with our partners. So the title of the class of this talk is Innovating Without Authority. And I think it's important that we just take a quick step back and very briefly define innovation. Because what we're not talking about here is we're not talking about inventing the next iPhone. We're not talking about flying cars, at least not coming out of our organization. Innovation, as we'll define it for the purposes of this, is the act of doing something new or pushing something forward. So it may be inspired by something you already do every day. It might be something that, is built around a legacy system. But innovation is about changing these things for the better. And that's, again, a big part of what this conversation is going to be, not just through the lens of you, the person who's using the platform, but also through the lens of you, the person who hopefully is trying to do something that changes the things around you as well. So we're going to start small. And I want to go ahead and, in homage of Valentine's Day, I want to challenge you to think about yourself. Yeah, just take a moment and think about just you. When we think about innovating without authority, when we talk about anything without authority, not necessarily saying that you don't have authority, but when you think about doing something without it, one of the most valuable things that you can start to do is to focus inwards on what it is that you bring to the table. So why do we challenge you to start small? Why do we, and I don't literally mean just focus on you. What I'm really talking about here is this idea of focusing on what it is that you can control. So why am I suggesting that? Well, one, agility. There is literally the most agile possible route because you are saying, I control everything, the entire stack, and I'm going to make a decision and I'm going to go do it, which is immeasurably useful when it comes to getting acclimatized to what these platforms bring to bear. Licensing. The reality is that if you don't understand Power Platform licensing, and candidly, who can blame you? You're going to find out pretty quickly what it is you can and cannot do. And it's so much better to find those boundaries when you're working on something that is, personally valuable as opposed to organizationally valuable. And the last bit here, I think, kind of ties it all together, which is this idea of just learning and also doing weird stuff. I think that that's something that's criminally under-discussed when we talk about these low-code, no-code platforms, when we talk about these power platforms. Doing weird stuff, trying to see how you can make it do something different. It's too easy to go into the template store, and I'm certainly not besmirching it, of Power Automate or using a template from Power Apps and starting there. But to really start to think about how can you make this work for you in a meaningful way. So this is the why. Take a step back and ask yourself from an individual perspective, what it is that you can solve for you. And there's perhaps no greater universal solve when it comes to personal optimization than work about work. This idea that we spend up to 60% of any given week doing work that is just about the work, not the work itself. So that's attending meetings, that's responding to emails, that's now increasingly responding to Teams messages, Slack messages, coordinating meeting times, finding files. It's the work about work piece of it. That's a lot of time spent. Today, the average employee uses 10 different apps to complete their tasks every day. And if you're one of the lucky ones, that's all in the vertical stack of Microsoft 365. But that may not necessarily be the case. And I say lucky ones in a simplicity perspective sense, but like my organization, we consider ourselves a best of breed organization. So we support the Microsoft 365 stack. We also support Zoom, Slack, Asana, SurveyMonkey. So the average employee using 10 different apps to complete their tasks every day doesn't surprise me one bit. This is out of research done in tandem by Sapio Research and Asana for their Anatomy of Work Index, which was published a little bit earlier. Each week, employees waste more than 10% of their time duplicating efforts. This is out of that same Anatomy of Work Index. So take into consideration both of those things that we just shared. That the average employee uses 10 different apps to complete their tasks every day. And that 10% of a time in a given week tends to be wasted on duplicating efforts. There's this really, really cool method that came out of Toyota, the system called the 5 Whys. And the idea behind it is it's a system optimization process. And the idea behind it is that when something goes wrong, or when something is identified as being wrong, you should ask why 5 times. So, as an example, somebody, or the presentation for the executive board meeting was not ready. Why? The admin didn't upload the file in time. Why? Because the admin didn't get the file until Sunday night at 11:59 p.m. Why? Because we didn't get the research information that we needed, because the person that was supposed to be organizing that research didn't get access to all the files that they needed to, couldn't find all the files they needed to until Friday evening. Why? Because that person is having trouble identifying where this content is supposed to live, where the latest versions of that information live. And so what you're seeing here is each layer of why. It starts out with an admin didn't do a thing. But as you drill further and further into it, what you're identifying is actually a human problem tied to technology. So solving for that specific challenge becomes the impetus, not, oh, well, the admin should do better. There's so many, it's the domino effect and all of that. And so what I'm trying to highlight here as we're talking about this is this idea that there's areas that we can optimize for personally. There are areas that we can try to enhance using the Power Platform. So when I see today, the average employee uses 10 different apps to complete their tasks every day, well, why? Well, it's because the data that they need is scattered across all these different spaces. Why? Because maybe those are the best tools for the job, and maybe it's unavoidable that those are the tools that we're going to use to ingest and to manage. But if all they need is to, get a quick snapshot of what one of those tools says, or to get an update, or to understand what's changed, well, then maybe they don't necessarily need to be going to those 10 different apps every single day. Instead, maybe it's possible for us to take those signals, those activities, those flags that are taking place in other apps and services, and move them into a central destination like, I don't know, Teams, or SharePoint, or Slack if you're a Slack organization, and make that what it's supposed to be, the center of work in a lot of different ways. And so that's the thing that I want to start to challenge you to do as we're going through this here, is start to ask those why questions when it comes to that kind of not just personal inefficiency, but as we scale this out, organizational inefficiency. Each week, employees waste more than 10% of their time duplicating efforts. Why? As a technical trainer for 3 years, teaching people Excel, one of the things that I got out of that was a deep understanding and a deep appreciation for the fact that people don't feel like they have time to solve for these inefficiencies. People are far more willing to, build a incredibly dense nested VLOOKUP than they will ever feel like they're comfortable having time spent learning index and match, which is an alternative, some might argue a better alternative to VLOOKUP. And those same people may not necessarily be taking the time to learn XLOOKUP, which is kind of the natural successor to both of those. And so that's your why right there, is why are employees wasting more than 10% of their time duplicating efforts? They often don't feel like they have not necessarily the tools to solve for this, but they don't have the time to put those tools to work to solve for those problems. And that's generally an issue of messaging, because these tools are so capable of focusing on the simplest of things can be solved by this. So continue to hold on to this as we go throughout that. Those 5 whys can make a world of difference when analyzing your own personal opportunities for optimization. So we've talked a little bit about the why with respect to getting started small. But let's talk about what that might actually look like. So these are just some ideas that I came up with on a coffee-fueled bender last night that really, I think, encapsulate the power of what these platforms bring to bear with Well, one, a little bit of creative thinking. And two, really just asking the question, how can I do something? How can I build something that makes my job easier? That's the question in all of this. How do I do something? How do I build something that makes it so that this thing that happens every week doesn't make me want to pull my hair out when it happens because I've solved for some small part of that? Now, they're certainly not saying solve for an entire process, but if you could solve for the middle bits, my God, the opportunities are limitless. I hear this all the time, that people don't have enough time to focus on the work that they need to do alone. And the reality is, and we've all heard this advice, that we need focus time. We need to be able to block time out to protect ourselves. Funny enough, Microsoft addressed this briefly in their Viva presentation announcing the product last week. And they're aiming to solve for it, this idea that people need to block off time for themselves to focus on things. Now, of course, when Viva will come in its full form to the government clouds is who knows. So this is just as relevant as ever. So take a look at this. This is a really, really simple Power Automate flow. Sunday through Thursday at 4, maybe 3 p.m., this flow kicks off. It takes a look at your calendar for the next day and it finds available meeting times. This is using the same API that the scheduling assistant uses to recommend available times. But in this instance, it's only trying to find available meeting times for you. And it's trying to find an unblemished 1 hour or 2 hour block of time. And once it finds one, it takes the very first one it's offered and it creates an event. It blocks that time off on its calendar. Now, this is one of those things where you might say, well, I can do that myself. Of course you can, but are you? And are you doing it with the consistency that you need to continue to protect your time on an ongoing basis? And that's what this is all about. Is of course you can do as a person, as an individual, of course you can do this. But why would you when you have a tool that will do it for you? Much in the same way that can I analyze data to the same degree that a pivot table does? Sure. How much time you got? I can do it. Not going to be happy about it. We have tools that will help solve for that. So this is a really compelling and simple example. And you can see here that it's not doing anything novel per se. Like there are no wild and crazy components. I'm not using external services. I'm really just asking myself the question, what is it that I need personally? And how do I build something towards that? Just as an aside, if it doesn't find any available time, of course, it just doesn't do anything. So you might consider punting it a week and continually rolling blocking your time. The recurrence can easily be set to do it, just Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or I'm sorry, Tuesday, Thursday, what have you. Here's another example using Power Automate again, intelligent auto replies. Outlook rules are good. I want to be clear about this here, that for the mass majority of basic use cases, Outlook rules do exactly what they need to do when it comes to processing emails. But when it comes to acting on them, this is a whole different ballgame. So take a look at this. When a new email arrives. Now, of course, yeah, this is processing every email that runs through your inbox potentially. Of course, you could easily set rules to only trigger when these emails arrive from certain people with certain keywords. But in this instance, we'll go ahead and hone in on when any email arrives. Well, taking a look at who the email is from, perhaps we want to build hard-coded rules for specific individuals. So for example, if we get an email from the boss. We get an email from the boss. Well, maybe we've got a really, really simple micro Power App. And we'll talk a little bit more about micro Power Apps in just a little bit. That's not a Microsoft brand name, that's a Sean brand name. We've got this little utilitarian Power App whose sole purpose is just to give me notifications that I can control. Because right now, when you consider the notifications that you're gonna get from Microsoft if you leave Outlook turned on, if you leave Teams turned on, if you leave all these other services, at their will, barraging you with notifications, it's inundating. But perhaps if you had a simple micro app, a simple micro power app, that's whole purpose was just to receive notifications and process those for you, just the ones that you cared about, this could be a really compelling use case. For those of you who are in GCC, you know that you recently got access to Microsoft To Do in the web. They are still working on the desktop and the mobile app support, but you do have access to the web app. It is not easy to get to, as I you got to know where to look, but it is available. So perhaps when I receive an email from my boss, yes, send me that notification. Maybe I turn off all notifications to my Outlook, but I'm getting this push notification through my Power App. And I'm also getting a to-do item to make sure that I read and respond to that email accordingly. We could even take that a step further and move that off to a dedicated folder, or alternatively, maybe this is the one kind of email that stays in my inbox. Another example, we receive an email from vendor X. Well, as opposed to having a auto reply for all people who email me, which would be a ham-fisted way of trying to manage a deluge of emails, instead, let's build a Power Automate where one of the actions is, if I receive an email from this individual, reply to it immediately. It's going to come from you. So reply to it automatically and say, thank you for reaching out. I will get back to you as quickly as possible. And then flag that email for follow-up. Again, you could take that a step further. You could, if it's from a specific vendor and you've told them time and again that, that any invoices that they attach to those emails need to be sent to accounts payable, you could easily build a condition that evaluates the email after you have identified that it's from vendor X. If it has an attachment, take that attachment, upload it to where it's supposed to go, and go about your day. Switch case, the switch case that we're using here is really just an if-then on steroids. It allows us to consider a litany of different potential venues of potential things. And of course, if no case contains a matching value, in this case, if an email arrives that doesn't have a hard-coded response, well, we might move the email over into another folder. Like I said, we talked about this idea that maybe the boss, maybe emails from important people are the only ones that actually stay in the inbox. The goal here is not to dictate process to you as we talk about this. The goal is to highlight that this is a simple use case. My inbox is a mess, and I want to do something about it. I want to do something that will help me feel better when I step into my inbox. I want to do something that will help me understand what my calls to action are as quickly as possible. Microsoft is clearly building tools to help try to solve for this, whether it's by identifying actionable language or sending you the Cortana daily briefing every day to let you know what things you accidentally committed to via email. But the reality is nobody knows your processes like you do. Nobody knows your challenges like you do. And that's why these tools are so powerful. Because Microsoft will never be able to build for exactly what it is that you need. They'll get close. They'll build useful things. But being able to take those things into your own hands is so powerful. Here's another one. I built a really, really simple Power App. All it does is it shows a list of styles of emails, right? And then you tap on that and you type in who it's going to, what's the subject line, and any custom parameters within an email. So in this example, we're seeing who is the audience, MTC staff. So it knows the email address and it knows the prefix. What's the message? Drop it in. And if there's any additional information, we can drop it below. So I only need to know the message and I can go ahead and send that off right from my phone. It's a really, really powerful, if simple, implementation. And by the way, the HTML that came out of this that I'm using for this particular Power App in tandem with Power Automate, I stole it from MailChimp. You can just create a MailChimp account for free and then design a template and then export that template into HTML and you've got it pretty HTML. You drop it in, put the components where you need to go, and you're off to the races. It's such a simple implementation, but the impact not just looks good, it feels good, because it's so much easier now for me to fire off these good-looking emails right from my phone, right from the couch. If my boss is listening to this, I don't sit on the couch during the workday. I sit at this desk and I work very hard. So we've talked about this idea of starting small. What I want to do now is take a step back and start to talk about this idea of understanding your influence landscape. Now, that is fluffy language if ever I've seen it, but I promise there's stuff in here. So hang in there with me. Ask yourself this question. As you step into the space of trying to innovate without authority, of trying to do big things without authority, we've already talked about this idea of solving for the things that you have total autonomy on, total control of. And you should absolutely start there. That's going to give you the personal expertise to confidently advocate for this as you broaden your bubble. But before you start broadening your bubble, you should ask yourself, what kind of resource are you planning on being? Are you planning on being, I don't know, the workhorse? Are you going to evangelize this in the sense that you want people to use these tools so badly that you're going to do all the work for them? I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing. You know, sometimes adoption is trying to do something that is absolutely not scalable just to showcase what's possible. You know, we were talking about this just before we started the recording. One of you in the audience had made mention that you're getting ready to roll out the Power Platform to 35,000 people. You know, what kind of resource are you going to be when you start as a team of one trying to share the message of what's possible? Are you going to be the workhorse for 35,000 people? That might not necessarily be realistic, but it might be step one. I hope that there's a step one before that, and we'll talk about different options here. But understanding what kind of resource you're going to be is so important, and saying to yourself, these are my boundaries. This is where I'm going to be useful and where I will not be. Are you going to be a teacher? So maybe you're not going to do everything for everybody, but maybe you're going to go out of your way. You're going to take extra effort, extra care to teach people how to do something, you know, from the pulpit, to distribute resources, to organize trainings, to organize video recordings that will showcase how within your organization these things are valuable. Are you going to be the partner where, you know, this is kind of an interesting hybridization between the teacher and the workhorse? This idea that you want to teach people, but you'll teach them by doing it with them. You know, these are all viable ways of being a resource as we push these platforms forward. You could also be the evangelist, which is arguably the least hands-on. You know, this idea that maybe you're just going to showcase what other people have done. And I think that there's a real potential to do so, to come back to the 35,000 person example, to talk about, to showcase what other people have already done. Because the reality is 35,000 people is surely somebody who's going to latch onto these ideas and do something cool. And you really only need a handful of those people to showcase to the rest that there are people among us that have made these things work for them, and that you too can be one of those people. You may not necessarily be just one kind of resource. For me, for example, I'm definitely probably closer to a partner, skewing closer to being a workhorse some days, although I'm getting better at drawing my own boundaries. But it's really just acknowledging where it is that you feel you are going to provide the most value when it comes to pushing this agenda forward. So now that we've talked about this idea of identifying what kind of resource you're going to be, it's important to understand where your influence lies. You know, and this, as I mentioned at the beginning, this conversation, this class is inspired from a class that I used to teach that was influencing without authority. And this is actually directly from that. It's this idea of understanding who are the people that make decisions? Who are the people that matter? Who are not necessarily the people that matter from a decision-making standpoint, but maybe if they poo-poo something, then that hinders it. That hinders the success of the program. So you don't have to build it. You don't actually have to take out a scrap of paper and draw a couple of bubbles that indicate, if you have direct reports, your team, maybe you want to break out your team into individuals. But it's a good exercise. And the idea behind it is to understand where you have direct spheres of influence and where you need potentially to consider engaging with other people to get to other people. So I'll use the example of the department head here. I don't have direct access to my department head in this scenario, but I do have access to my boss. So the question becomes, is my work visible? Is the innovative work that I'm trying to push forward, that I'm trying to advocate for, is it visible through my boss? That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to activate your supervisor to become the same degree of evangelist that you are or that you aim to be. But it is important to consider the proximity and the visibility of you and the work that you're doing. And we'll talk a little bit more so about this idea of visibility, because I think too often, particularly in the technology space, let me take a step back, particularly within the legacy mindset of the technology space, that people in IT and people working with technology are supposed to be seen, not heard, or heard only when called upon. And that's not the way the game works anymore. The reality is that technology is an essential arm of the business. These are not supportive roles anymore. They're leading roles in a lot of different spaces. And so it's really important to understand that and to embrace that when we talk about visibility. And again, we'll get into that a little bit more in just a moment. But building your influence map can help give some perspective on where it is that you can start once you've taken that step beyond trying to optimize for just you. So taking the example that we ran earlier, or that we started with, this idea that I'm going to start solving for my personal workflow challenges. Once I feel confident in that, who am I advocating to? Who am I bragging to that I'm able to do these things now, to encourage them to also want to do those things? Well, your direct reports, you can see here in terms of proximity, my direct reports, if I had any, they're closest in proximity. They're the most visible of my work. And so they might be the next place that I turn. I have almost total autonomy when it comes to influencing the ways in which my direct reports work. To that same end, you also have varying degrees of autonomy with how you deliver and process and manage your workflows when working with your team and maybe even potentially your boss. So those kinds of considerations are what help us consider how we move beyond just optimizing for us. I won't spend a ton of time on this one here because we've dove headlong into the touchy-feely, but I do want to highlight this idea of currencies. So when we talk about trying to influence, trying to do things without overt authority, again, whether you have that authority or not, it's not a question of do you, it's should you be wielding it to what end? And in this instance, if we're trying to do things organically through grassroots efforts, through interest, it's important that we understand what kind of currencies are in play. And when we talk about currencies, what we're really talking about are personal values. What is it that people connect with? And that's why it can be so important to understand your influence map, not just who these people are, but what are their motivations? Is your boss trying to have, trying to get the next job, trying to take their boss's job in the future when that person steps down or moves on to a new opportunity? Starting with the inspiration currency. So this is, if you take a look at the Microsoft community as an example. Microsoft plays heavily on the inspiration currency, wanting people to feel good about the potential of it. And I think if you're paying attention, it's clear that I also believe in the inspiration currency. I love the idea of getting people excited about what's possible. Inspiration currency is powerful, but I will tell you that the audience for inspiration currency is few and far between, specifically when you're talking about within an organization. There's task currency. I just need to do my job, man. Task currency is, I don't care how I get there. I want to do it in the most effective and efficient way possible, either because I need to get onto the next task or because I really hate doing it. Position currency, where it is that I am today and where it is that I would like to go tomorrow. This idea of what matters to me is where I am positionally, and doing something good will advance me positionally. And lastly, personal currency. This is really similar to task currency, but ultimately it's not about getting the job done. It's more about you getting the job done so that either you can feel good about having done a hard day's work, or so that you can get this damn thing off your plate. These are all meaningful currencies, and it's not that any one individual will have just one type of currency that plays for them. Instead, it's this idea of understanding what their internal motivations are. Because that conversation, if we're talking about inspiration, like I'll tell you, my CTO, who is a wonderful human being, really enjoy having conversations with him. And we have a lot in common. I know definitively the inspiration currency does not play. He could not care less about what's possible. He wants to know how we can get the best possible job done today that we can. He wants tangibles. He wants realistic. So he's very focused on positional currency and task currency. He wants the job done and he wants it to look good. He wants us to look good. And who can blame him? Find your allies, build your community. So I promised we would step away from the touchy-feely, and that's exactly what we're going to do here. Find your allies, build your community. Once you move beyond the bubble of what's possible to optimize for me, you need to start to take into consideration, well, I can't do this alone, right? Are you really going to take the workhorse mentality beyond your bubble? You might. And again, if you do, that's okay. Understand that it's not sustainable, it's not scalable, and that its legacy is only as durable as your stamina. So if you're going to try and expand beyond your bubble, you need to find allies. We often describe these as champions, people who are excited, who are interested, who are invested, even if they don't necessarily have an organizational reason to be. So how do you build that community? Well, here's an option. Yammer communities. If you haven't tried new Yammer, let me go ahead and take a step back here and say that I was a Yammer skeptic. And when I say Yammer skeptic, I mean I made fun of Yammer a lot. Steve Wynn, if you happen to find this video too, I am not sorry. I was a Yammer skeptic. But new Yammer really pushes the ball forward towards a genuine community space for people to connect, to engage, to showcase information. It's a really powerful way of doing so. It's not the only way of doing so. And as many of us here in the government space know, Yammer communities are not as robust in Teams as they are in the commercial space. So perhaps Teams channels makes more sense. If you're already using Teams, why not capitalize with a channel that is specifically dedicated to automation, to app development, to low code? Now, one of the things that you'll notice that I'm doing in this particular example is I'm not using the brand of the product as the destination. It's really easy to buy into the marketing hype of the Power Platform, of Microsoft in general, of companies in general. Most people don't care that it's Power Automate or Power Apps. They know what it's called in the same way that they know what Microsoft Word is called But Word in itself is not a destination. What you do in Word is the destination. And likewise, you should have that lens about what is it that people are trying to do. They're trying to automate. They're trying to build an app. So keeping in mind those goals, this is very, very similar to this conversation we're having about currency. Understanding what it is that people are trying to do, what their motivations are in that space, should inform how you build up these community spaces, how you build outreach. Because if you send out an email, it's like, who wants to learn about Power Automate? Even if it's to 35,000 people, the response is not going to be the same as sending an email out to 35,000 people that says, hey, do you do a thing that you would like to not do as often? Are you replicating efforts from week to week? Do you think to yourself constantly, there's got to be a better way, but you don't have time to find out what that is? That's compelling. And it speaks to the internal goals that people have. So it's important that you take those into consideration. Now, of course, within that, it's not to say that you're hiding the brand, but don't let the brand be the flag. Specifically, if there's ever any risk of your organization changing vertical stacks, from Microsoft to Google or whatever, that's just good marketing there. I talked about this earlier. I alluded to it at least. Make some noise. We talked about this idea that you are starting with yourself. But that certainly doesn't mean that you can't find ways of imbuing advocacy of what it is that you're doing. These are just two examples. When I did start to automate emails, because of course those emails are coming from me, I did want a way of letting people know, hey, a bot sent this, an automation sent this. But it's also a really great opportunity to make it look good. This email was sent using Power Automate, and then link that to a video that explains what Power Automate is. Or, as we'll talk about in just a moment, link it to an internal space in SharePoint, Yammer, Slack, wherever, to showcase how this is being used within the organization. As you start to build apps and Power Apps, use that as an opportunity, again, to showcase somebody inside this organization is doing it. It's super easy to mistake a Power App for just being a thing that exists, that just is a feature, that wasn't built by the organization, that you disconnect from it being Sean in technology services that actually built that. And having that human understanding of what people are doing, what people are building, is compelling to other people who may look at me and go, well, he's not super technical. I'm not. He's not super technical. He did this, and this is awesome. Or this would be better if. So make some noise. And as we push the ball forward again towards this idea of creating community spaces, that starts to balloon. I love this one. Find the easy wins. So these are two screenshots from actual applications that are in production, that exist, that are used by staff every single day in my organization. Neither of these are complex apps. One of them is inspired by an app that Microsoft put out as a free sample that I took and re-engineered so that I didn't have to use Dataverse. Finding the easy wins is about trying to identify low impact, low effort, high visibility opportunities to optimize. Because that's where that make some noise conversation we just had a second ago really shines. So this is a great example. Executives were constantly griping about the fact that they couldn't access the contact information, not just for our internal directory, but they couldn't access it for our board of commissioners. They couldn't access the executive board of directors or any of the partner agencies that we worked with. So that data all existed somewhere. Where did it exist? Great question. Glad you asked. It existed in an Excel spreadsheet that was being managed by wonderful admins. But the reality was it was an inaccessible way to get access to this information. So I built what I describe as a micro app. It's a utilitarian single purpose app. And the idea behind it is that you can have a ton of them that people can use and not use and step into and jump out of with no issue whatsoever. The idea behind it is just exactly what we're talking about here, creating small, easy wins. Optimizing areas, the Excel spreadsheet, let me just tell you, if you're asking yourself, what are those small wins? Just put out an APB on all Excel spreadsheets in your organization. And I guarantee you're going to identify business processes that have been run since day one out of Lotus 123 and then Excel. Starting there can make a world of difference. Now, one thing that I'll add here that I didn't include in this talk, but I think hopefully it's something that has shown throughout, is that design matters. And that if you have to make a decision of diverting resources or dedicating resources to advanced functionality versus intuitive design, take intuitive design every day of the week, especially when we're talking about the early days of pushing these products, especially when we're talking about just introducing people to what's possible. Because while you're paying attention to the Microsoft press releases and the conferences, the average Jane and Joe Schmo are not. So you have such a finite opportunity to showcase what's possible, how these things can look and feel. And so design does matter. We don't talk about it too much in this one here, but it's something that I believe in firmly. We're in the home stretch, gang. Hang in there with me. The last step here, institutionalize. It doesn't have to be the last step. It could be the first step. I'm not your boss. Showcase impact and success. So what I'm showing you here is a quick snapshot of what we call Spark. Spark is our innovation and development program. It's since been turned into an entire department within our organization that is dedicated to innovation and development. But the idea behind Spark was to create a formal destination to showcase how we as an organization are thinking about innovation. Now, I want to throw back to what I had said a little bit ago of don't lean into the brand as the destination. Don't use it as your banner. It would have been super easy for me to call this the Power Platform Center or something to that effect. But I didn't. Instead, we focused on what it is that we care about as an organization and trying to build around that. And in fact, this site has evolved because we had such a broad mandate to highlight and focus on innovation and innovative ideas. This has evolved to showcase things that have nothing to do with the Power Platform. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a win. Because when we talk about institutionalizing a concept, what we're talking about here is imbuing it into the fabric of how an organization functions, what it values. You don't want your mission statement to be our organization values Power Automate. Our organization values Power Apps or Power BI or the Power Platform. Our organization values empowering individuals to automate, to solve their own challenges at the ground floor, to create innovative solutions that impact the people around them, that impact our partners in the region, that impact 7.5 million constituents. That's a far more compelling story. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually pulling up. I mentioned at the beginning of this here that I wouldn't show you anything live in production. This is not live in production. This is an exact duplicate with some slight changes to showcase what the site actually brings to the table here. So of course, we've got case studies here that emphasize things that have been built both with and without the Power Platform. Clicking on any of these buttons to learn more takes you into a full breakdown of individuals that more often than not are saying, I didn't even know I could do this, but I was able to do it with little to no help. I also want to show you my Sparks. So again, keep in mind that this is a duplicate of the site. This is the non-production site, so it's going to look a little cardboardy for a second here. So My Sparks is a destination where staff can go to share their ideas to help make MTC a better place. Whether that's an innovative idea that's going to support us internally or a really clever way of taking existing tools and putting them to work to support our population. This is actually taking advantage of an app. The screenshot that I'm using here is not the app itself, but it is what we were inspired by, which was the innovation backlog. I'll share the link with you before we depart. The innovation backlog is a spinoff of a thing that Microsoft put out, I think last year, called the Center of Excellence. So the Center of Excellence was this community-built, Microsoft-built application solution built in Power Apps with Dataverse dependencies, with Power Automate dependencies. And the idea behind it was to showcase, one, what was possible using those platforms if you really put your mind to it. But one part that's come out of it recently has been, again, the innovation backlog. And put simply, the idea behind it is that you can go here as a staff member and you can add an idea and you can describe why it's painful. You can describe what tools are impacted by it, how complex it is, and people can vote on it. They can say, yeah, this sucks. I agree that this sucks. And we can use that not as a feeder for what we will commit to. No different than a company that, like Microsoft, that has user voice, that asks you for feedback and says people can vote on it. They don't do everything here, but they use it as a good barometer for where are people hurting? Where could things be better? And so that's what this is really all about. And one added bonus to this here is that because it's built in Power Apps, for many users, it's their first experience with a Power App. And seeing that and seeing them realize that that's a custom experience designed fully in-house is eye-opening. So we talked about showcasing impact and success. I also want to emphasize leaning into formality. So an idea comes out of that innovation backlog. Something is so compelling that my team decides to build it. Well, how do we highlight that that's available? How do we highlight those things have come to fruition? Well, we have to test them first. We have to put them out there. And that's where first look comes into play. So again, keep in mind that this is a duplicate of an existing in production site, but it's pretty much the same. The first look program is a destination where we highlight things that we're opening up to the organization. Now, again, this has ballooned beyond the Power Platform, but it is where it started. This idea that we would build something that we wanted to share with the organization that wasn't maybe not an official offering yet. Think of it as like an internal beta program or early access users. And so if somebody was interested, based on a description, they could click join this opportunity. By the way, did you guys know that Outlook supports this? This is criminally underemphasized that Outlook does support plus email addresses, even in GCC. I don't know about GCC High DoD, but I know for sure GCC, you do need to be an Exchange admin to turn it on. But these dynamic email addresses exist now, so you can add plus whatever at your email address, and it'll still come to your email, and you actually build rules off of it. It's super cool. I digress. Leaning into formality, giving that place a destination that's no longer just Sean is doing this thing. Creating a space that even if it is still you, even if it's still you being a workhorse, starting to build up a structure that goes beyond you. You absolutely can be the living and breathing heart of what pushes it forward, but starting to create those formal spaces that are, we are doing this, not I am doing this. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that here because I do want to, of course, open it up for questions if you've got any, but I want to emphasize that this all takes patience. It takes time, and you're going to hear a whole lot more no's than you are going to hear yeses when it comes to trying to build things that impact more than just you. But you've got this. Have patience, have focus, and you're going to be great. Questions?
See if you can unmute and ask your questions. Matt, Sean, I was muted, but I was laughing a lot, so I appreciate it.
I'm glad to hear it. I appreciate that.
For the chat, I do have Sean's social links and a show that Sean and Matt Wade do that is really, really good. It's a weekly show on the latest news that's done in a very fun format. And then in the innovation backlog you were mentioning, Sean, I put a link there in the chat.
Oh, you're the best. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I guess I should start plugging that podcast more, huh?
Well, it's a good one. It's a really good one.
It's fun to do.
So I would say this. So have you run into situations where you have innovated and put things out there and received negative feedback from management?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So that is, I would say that that's the best case scenario. Obviously the best case scenario is that they love it. But the second best case scenario, the alternative to that is negative feedback, because what you're getting from that is that, one, they care, because my God, it is so much better that they care. But two, that you have that opportunity to build a deeper relationship, to showcase that you can say anything and I can go do that, or that we can go do that now. Mm-hmm. There's nothing more. Oh, it's such a great feeling in a meeting to like showcase something that you've built, or that something's in development, and an executive or the executive director will say, this is great, but it would be nice if it did blank. And you're like, that's a great idea. You jump out of the presentation and you do it there in 2 seconds. You make the change and you bring it up and you say like this. The light bulbs that come out of those moments are priceless. And I think that absolutely you're going to get negative feedback, and it might be, this sucks, we're not doing it, I'm sorry. Whether you believe it sucks or not. But like, you have to take it not personally. You have to take it through the lens of, again, those personal motivations, those currencies we talked about. What is it that their ultimate goals are?
Interesting. And then how do you balance moving forward with innovation, but making sure somebody's not creating something that exposes sensitive information?
It's a really good question. So I would say this: people have always been able to do stupid things. It is. I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna take a firm stance on this. It's a fool's errand to try and stop people from doing it. Instead, you want to focus on training. Instead, you want to focus on active communication. And you also want to invest in monitoring, which the Power Platform isn't always as great at. So, of course, this is where I always highlight a tool called Clarity by a good friend of mine, John Liu. I'll share a link for that as well. It's a Power Platform monitoring and management overlay. And it's getting better all the time, but it's really, really powerful. But the reason I mention that is that, again, you can't stop people. We've always been able to do dumb things. If I really wanted to go download something and email it to the press, I can do it. So it's about good training. It's about good communication. And I think that that's really where the attention ought to lie. Now, I'm not saying don't have data loss policies or data loss prevention policies. I'm not saying don't have, labels and rules built around that in terms of accessibility, because those things go a long way in helping to protect data. But I would certainly say that you can't legislate your way out of somebody doing something dumb, and that shouldn't be what stops us from moving fast and taking, not risks necessarily, but death by committee is a real thing that exists. And I think that it's so important to try and get to tangible products before you shut things down to that degree. If that makes sense.
It does make sense. Interesting. All right, anybody else have questions?
All right.
Wow.
Well,
Quiet crowd. I think this is the link for Power Clarity.
oh, did you find it?
Yeah, I'm quick on the search. Some of which some of these things are quick on my bookmarks.
Let's see here. Yep, that's the one. Yeah, John Liu.
All right. Well, Sean, thank you for joining us today. Enjoy your warmer weather, warmer than, well, I guess Eric's also sharing that somewhat warmer weather with you. The rest of us will go back to our frigid areas and buckle down and stay indoors.
Hopefully the power stays on for everybody. I have no envy for your cold weather. Oh, thanks, Chris. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Jeremy, thank you for having me. This was so much fun. I think I joked about it on Twitter. It's been at least a year since I've given like a full-on talk, so it was nice to be able to get back into the groove. Yeah, thanks again.
Awesome. Well, we'll keep you in mind in the future because I know you've built Power Platform stuff in GCC, so there'd be some interesting lessons learned, maybe a future talk in the making.
Absolutely, I'm here for you.
All
Gang, for those of you here, don't hesitate to reach out to me on Twitter. As I mentioned, I couldn't show anything in production here today, but I'm always happy to show things in more confidential settings as well.
Awesome. Well, thank everyone for joining us today, and we hope you have a great rest of the holiday.
Cheers, gang.